Let's be clear. The marriage between Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari was supposed to end a drought that has lasted decades for Ferrari, which still hasn't won a title. The last driver's title won by Ferrari was in 2007 with Kimi Raikkonen, so Hamilton was called to bring Ferrari back to winning the title. But as of today, the situation is more disappointing than anything else. And some internal sources say it could be Hamilton's last contract with Ferrari. In today's video, we will look at why it could be Hamilton's last contract and who could replace him. We need to look at the statements of Benedetto Vigna and Vasseur about the end of the season in Ferrari and also about 2026. We also talk about Massa's crashgate, the situation of the second Red Bull driver, because Tsunoda is at the limit and at a crossroads and could be replaced by Lindblad. Before we start, please leave a supportive like. It costs you nothing, but makes a huge difference for me. I wholeheartedly thank you for all the messages of support. And now let's get started right away. It was supposed to be the big gamble of 2025. Hamilton at Ferrari after a lifetime at Mercedes to end his career with the dream of wearing the red and bringing back a title to Maranello that has been missing for too long. But the reality so far has been very different. 0 podiums in 20 races and 64 points behind Leclerc. The numbers speak for themselves. There's an adaptation that never really took off. Hamilton only won 1 sprint race in China, but was then disqualified after the race for having a problem with the floor of the SF25 worn beyond the limit. An episode that highlighted one of the biggest technical problems of Ferrari this year, the compromise on ride height. To avoid bottoming out and damaging the floor, the team had to raise the car, sacrificing a lot of aerodynamic downforce. Translated, less grip, more struggle in corners, and above all, less overall speed. But in the meantime, on the other side of the garage, Leclerc has become competitive again. He has achieved 7 podiums this season, the latest in Mexico, and a feeling with the SF25 that seems to improve race by race. And this internal comparison, ruthless in numbers, would have led some key figures within Ferrari to no longer believe in the long-term Hamilton project. According to ESPN, several senior figures at Maranello have already decided not to offer a renewal at the end of the current contract. A $57 million a year contract signed in 2024 and valid at least until the end of 2026. But beware, because the situation is even more complicated than that. In fact, the Gazzetta dello Sport had already revealed in August that Hamilton's contract contains a unilateral clause that would allow him to extend until 2027, even without the direct consent of the team. In practice, if Hamilton wanted to stay, Ferrari would have little to say. A clause considered controversial within the paddock. But the truth is that with such a disappointing season, it's hard to imagine Hamilton really wanting to stay another year under these conditions. Yet, at least in words, the 7-time world champion doesn't seem intent on giving up. In an interview with L'Equipe, he stated, "I have no intention of stopping soon." And he actually mentioned sending several documents to Ferrari to propose changes in the team's working method, internal communication, or management of race weekends. We have seen several documents sent to Maranello and discussed them throughout the year. An approach of a leader, of a driver who wants to change things internally, not of a driver who wants to retire already next year. Hamilton stated it clearly. He doesn't want to repeat the mistakes of Alonso and Vettel, 2 great champions who came to Maranello with the same goal, but never managed to win that world title. Among his documents, there would be suggestions on how to improve the car, but also on qualifying strategies and tire preparation. Just in Singapore, for example, Hamilton criticized the team's decision to make both Ferraris wait at the end of the pit lane, causing a drop in tire temperature and a consequent worsening in fast laps. A detail, yes, but in Formula 1, details make the difference between a podium and another anonymous race. So the real question is this. Has this story between Hamilton and Ferrari already reached the end of the line? So far, no one in Maranello has openly spoken of a breakup, but rumors are multiplying and the numbers don't help. Leclerc is carrying the team, Hamilton is struggling, and the pressure grows week by week. And the feeling is that Ferrari has bet on a dream that is more media-driven than technical. An image boost that hasn't yet brought concrete results. And if 2026 doesn't start differently, the paths between Hamilton and Maranello could separate much sooner than expected. And honestly speaking, the comparison with Leclerc is ruthless. The Monegasque has achieved 7 podiums this season, while Hamilton has 0. It has never happened in history that a driver has gone 20 races at Ferrari without achieving a podium. And it's understandable that a 7-time world champion needs to adapt to the driving style of Ferrari, the SF25, which is very particular in its handling and requires a more oversteering driving style. But at the same time, yes, you've driven Mercedes for over 10 years, but come on. You're a 7-time world champion, you need to patch things up. And it's normal to have doubts about Hamilton's contract renewal. In 2027, Lewis Hamilton will be 42 years old. Rarely in the history of modern Formula 1 have we seen drivers over 40 years old driving a single-seater. Of course, there's the emblematic case of Fernando Alonso. And let's remember that since 1970 with Jack Brabham, no one has managed to win a race after the age of 42. On the other hand, in Mexico, we saw Oliver Bearman do very well, finishing 4th at the finish line. And in this season, the NASA 3rd. He's convincing. In fact, the one who could take Hamilton's place is none other than Oliver Bearman, the young talent from the Ferrari Driver Academy, who had already impressed everyone in 2024 when he replaced Sainz in Saudi Arabia at Jeddah, and today is an absolute star with Haas. Even then, he scored points with a Ferrari that wasn't his, while this season with Haas, he has grown a lot. His 4th place in Mexico, the best for the team in years, propelled him ahead of Ocon in the standings, who is tough to beat. And coincidentally, his contract with Haas expires at the end of 2026. Perfect timing if Ferrari were to actually free up a seat. And here comes the most interesting part. For months, Vasseur and Ferrari management have been insisting on the concept of building for the future. But what future can you build with a 42-year-old driver who hasn't even managed to get on the podium in 20 races? It seems a bit like a provocation, and we must have the utmost respect for Lewis Hamilton for what he has achieved in these years. But this question has been circulating in the corridors of Maranello for weeks, because the truth is that Hamilton has brought image, sponsors, and global visibility. He's one of the most loved drivers in the paddock. You know, he's my favorite driver after Ayrton Senna, but from a sporting point of view, the choice hasn't paid off yet. Sure, the main blame is on the car, the Ferrari, and with Leclerc steady as the technical and charismatic leader of the team, Hamilton's position risks becoming untenable. On the other hand, we have to wait for 2026, because maybe with a competitive Ferrari, we can see the Hamilton we saw in the past fighting for world titles and challenging Verstappen. In 2021, when Hamilton lost the title due to a federation error that will remain in history books. The Briton, for his part, has never hidden the difficulties of fitting in. A few weeks ago, he spoke openly about the cultural differences between Mercedes and Ferrari. An elegant way to say that the way of working, communicating, and making decisions at Maranello is very different from what he was used to. And adapting at 40 is not easy. But the champion is still there. Hamilton is competitive, motivated. After the summer break, I saw him as a new driver, and he knows the future depends on how he tackles 2026. Because if the new rules level the performances, a comeback is always possible. Also, let's remember, the 2022 regulations did not favor Hamilton's driving style. On the contrary, it went against him. Until 2022, he was very comfortable driving the pre-ground effect single-seaters. With 2026, the single-seaters will generate less downforce from the floor. And this move will favor the 7-time world champion, who was more comfortable driving the cars in 2021 or 2020 with a lot of aerodynamic load generated from the upper part of the car. But as of today, we can say the wind is blowing in the opposite direction. And I also want to know your opinion. Is Ferrari making a mistake by not renewing Hamilton? Or is it right to bet everything on the future with Leclerc and Bearman? Surely Ferrari must justify the investment they made with Lewis Hamilton, so they can't abandon the path of the 7-time world champion so soon, and must aim in 2026 to maximize his potential. However, at the same time, the idea of putting Oliver Bearman in Ferrari is becoming more concrete, as he is increasingly convincing by outperforming his teammate Ocon, who is a veteran of Formula 1, and also tough to beat, on comparisons with Charles Leclerc are immediate. Oliver Bearman also comes from a satellite team. Just like Charles Leclerc in Sauber, Bearman in Haas is also showing his potential, and the detail that makes the difference is his sensitivity in braking. It's something very rare. He can be very aggressive in slow spots and manage speed in fast corners, which is a characteristic few rookies have. However, in Maranello, they are not just looking for speed in a driver. They want a talent who can also manage the pressure, which we know is really high in Ferrari. In fact, as soon as you make a mistake, you're immediately judged. As soon as you do something positive, you're put on a pedestal. And so you continue to live the ups and downs in this roller coaster of emotions that obviously affect your mood. The good news for Bearman is that time is on his side. The contract ends at the end of 2026 with perfect timing. For, with the end of Hamilton's contract, Martin Brundle has no doubts. As soon as a spot opens in Ferrari, Oliver Bearman should be first on the list. He's a driver who doesn't waste opportunities. You give him a chance, and he takes it to the fullest. In Mexico, remember, he also kept Oscar Piastri behind, and at certain moments kept pace with Max Verstappen with Haas. You understand well the difference between Verstappen driving a Red Bull with updates and Bearman driving a Haas that has stopped updates for some time. And another thing Jacques Villeneuve, 1997 world champion, noticed is that Bearman is aggressive but always has everything under control. He has an awareness of his surroundings that few young drivers possess. But do you think he's ready to drive a Ferrari? Surely a statistic makes you think. In the last 6 races, on 5 occasions, Bearman has been faster than Ocon, his teammate. So surely they are watching this driver closely at Maranello. From my point of view, they won't give up on the Hamilton bet soon at Ferrari, at least for 2026. And maybe even for 2027, we might still see Hamilton in red. Rightly so, because he's a 7-time world champion, he should be given the chance to show his potential with a competitive car. And you can see Hamilton still has a lot of hunger. However, at the same time, we shouldn't underestimate these young drivers because they have the opportunity to do very well in the official teams and are stronger and more mature than we think. That's my impression. That said, let's hear Benedetto Vigna's statements after the last 2 races, where Ferrari returned to second in the Constructors' Championship, 1 point ahead of Mercedes and 10 points ahead of Red Bull. It's clear that the SF25 was stronger in Austin, Mexico, but Benedetto Vigna said, "There are other teams where everything runs better than with us. We need to make sure that all the necessary ingredients to make us win are working correctly." Translated, Ferrari is not yet a perfect team. There are mechanisms that work intermittently and processes that need improvement. Speaking of Leclerc's 2 podiums, Vigna added, "It's a sign that makes us happy, but we need to stay grounded." A quote from the great Maurizio Arrivabene, who said it years ago when he was at Ferrari. Certainly in Maranello, they don't want to delude themselves, because yes, we saw two positive races, but we are coming from a negative period, from after the summer break onwards, with the last flash, if you will, being Hungary before the summer break, where Leclerc led the race for many laps. And then we know that a double podium at this moment does not erase a season below expectations. The last 4 Grand Prix in Brazil, Las Vegas, Qatar, and Abu Dhabi will be a decisive test. Vigna then concluded, "We continue to work in a united and cohesive manner because there are still 4 races and we have to give our best." In short, Ferrari wants to end the year demonstrating solidity, not just occasional performances. Vasseur himself stated, "You only understand what Ferrari really is when you get there. When you're outside, you respect the brand, but when you enter, you feel the power of the Ferrari name. It's a different energy. The first time you arrive at the gate and find the fans out there, already from the early hours of the morning, it's something incredible. Wherever we go in the world, half of the fans are ours. After the victory in Monza, the mechanics returned at 1 a.m., and there were still fans waiting for them. This is a reference to Leclerc's victory at Monza in 2024. However, this passion is a double-edged sword, because this love from the fans gives us enormous energy," says Vasseur, "but it also brings enormous pressure. I always put myself under pressure. At Ferrari, you can never feel satisfied. And these are honest words, very different from the usual language of team principles, because Vasseur doesn't hide difficulties, at least at this moment, but he experiences them as a form of fuel. They nourish him. Ferrari is the best example of how one can be proud of their past, but always look forward. It's part of the Ferrari magic, but it's precisely this passion that makes Ferrari unique. And it will be interesting to see if Ferrari and Frédéric Vasseur can turn this pressure into performance on track in the final 4 races of this season, finish 2025 at least in 2nd place in the constructors' standings, and then kick off 2026 aiming for the World Championship title. I report some phrases from Lewis Hamilton, who said that his adaptation process to Ferrari is almost complete, and that he found a more open environment at Ferrari than he had imagined. He was concerned about the cultural differences at Ferrari, but he managed to adapt. But let's talk about Max Verstappen. Because according to Martin Brundle, Max Verstappen will not be able to be world champion in 2025 and the title will go to McLaren. Verstappen has too much to recover, and the 2025 title will be McLaren's. These are heavy words, especially because they come from one of the most respected commentators in the paddock. And the feeling is that this time Brundle might be right. Until mid-season, the championship seemed already closed. McLaren was dominating everywhere, Verstappen seemed out of the game, and Red Bull was experiencing one of the most difficult periods of the hybrid era. We saw Christian Horner leave after 20 years at Red Bull. Then Max, as always, turned the narrative around. He secured 3 victories in the last 6 races, a series of consistent podiums, and a comeback that brought him to just 36 points behind Lando Norris, with 4 races and 2 sprints still to go. Is it a possible feat? On paper, yes, but Brundle disagrees. As things stand now, I believe Max has too much to do. McLaren will be faster in at least 2 of the last 4 races, and Max has no one to help him up front, unless Ferrari or even Mercedes get involved. Brundle explains that in the remaining circuits, McLaren is the favorite, especially in Qatar and Abu Dhabi, perfect tracks for their aerodynamics and tire management. And indeed, after Mexico, Lando Norris returned to the lead in the championship, overtaking Piastri by just 1 point, with Verstappen right behind. By now, let's be clear, the fight among the 3 up front is a psychological battle. Norris, Piastri and Verstappen are also challenging each other in managing the pressure, and Max, for the first time in years, is no longer the absolute master of the situation, obviously not through any fault of his own, but due to the car he's driving. But he himself admitted in a post-race conference, "I've lost 10 points to Lando," Max said. "I had said that to win. A perfect weekend was needed and this wasn't one. We aren't fast in every condition and we need to understand why." It's a clear-headed Verstappen, aware that Red Bull this year is no longer unbeatable. Brundle said it himself. Unless Norris and Piastri complicate their lives on their own, the title will remain with McLaren. Max would need to gain 12 or 15 points per weekend, and this is simply too much. And Jacques Villeneuve instead expressed his opinion on Max Verstappen's teammate, Yuki Tsunoda, saying that he is already in decline. First, there was Liam Lawson alongside Verstappen, hurriedly called in to replace Perez. But then, after just 2 races, he was demoted to Racing Bulls. And so Red Bull decided to bet on Yuki Tsunoda, hoping his experience could bring stability. But according to Villeneuve, that choice is proving to be a mistake. In Mexico, Tsunoda finished 11th, just shy of the points but far from Verstappen. And Villeneuve is not having it, he said. I don't understand how a team can say it was a good weekend for Tsunoda. Yuki is still too far from his teammate. He doesn't deliver results, doesn't bring points, doesn't help Verstappen or Red Bull itself in the title fight. And for 2026, we probably won't see Tsunoda in Red Bull, also because Red Bull made him an official driver thanks to the partnership with Honda, who wanted a Japanese driver in the team. We'll see in 2026 who will be Verstappen's teammate. The most likely names are Isack Hadjar and Liam Lawson, but also watch out for Arvid Lindblad because he's only 17. But after the Mexican Grand Prix practice sessions, he managed to leave everyone speechless. And Helmut Marko, for once, didn't hold back on the compliments. During FP1 in Mexico City, Lindblad took the wheel of the RB21 in place of Verstappen. He didn't make any mistakes and finished 6th, just 0.6 seconds off Leclerc's best time. But the most interesting thing is about Helmut Marko's statements, who said, his feedback was impressive. We are really happy with him. For Arvid, the situation was difficult. He was told not to crash, but did an excellent job. He was the fastest rookie and showed great maturity for his age. He will most likely debut in Racing Bulls next year, and thus one of the 2 Racing Bulls drivers will go to Red Bull. But as of today, Lindblad seems to be the future of Red Bull, even after Max Verstappen. And I obviously want to comment on the appeal made by Felipe Massa, because Massa said that Ferrari asked him to keep quiet. In fact, the trial related to the 2008 Crashgate has begun. The Brazilian also brought up Ferrari. It all starts from that infamous 2008 Singapore Grand Prix, the day when Nelson Piquet Jr. deliberately crashed into the wall, triggering a safety car and changing the course of the race and also the course of history. On that occasion, Alonso, Piquet's teammate in Renault, took advantage of the situation to win the race. Massa, on the other hand, who had been dominating until that point, saw it all slip away due to a pit stop error. From then on, the world title ended up in Lewis Hamilton's hands by just 1 point. And today, more than 15 years later, Massa is back fighting. He took the case to court, seeking a multi-million-dollar compensation of $82 million, convinced that that episode compromised a world championship that could have been in his, but the real bombshell came during his testimony. Massa recounted for the first time what happened inside Ferrari. Todd called me into his office and told me that Nelson Piquet Jr. had crashed on purpose, but I didn't believe him because there wasn't a good relationship between him and Briatore. Then months later, Massa met Briatore in Bahrain. I asked him if it was true. He denied it, but I immediately realized he was lying. The most striking detail, however, comes afterward. Ferrari didn't like my statements about Alonso knowing everything, and for this, I was reprimanded, and it's a direct accusation against the team. According to Massa, Ferrari asked him to remain silent, not to fuel controversies, to protect political relationships in the paddock, and this is precisely one of the most sensitive points of the trial today. How much did Ferrari really know, and how much did they decide not to say? On the other side, FIA and Ecclestone responded as expected. Too much time has passed, and Massa himself, they say, made several mistakes that season, but the Brazilian does not give up. He wants the moral and sporting damage to be recognized and does not rule out that new documents and new testimonies may emerge from this trial. The Crashgate is already one of the most serious scandals in Formula One history. Now it reopens with a new chapter, and for the first time, it's not just Renault in the crosshairs, but also Ferrari. And already in 2021, we witnessed the scandal of the World Championship stolen from Lewis Hamilton due to Michael Masi's decision to restart the race on the last lap. And according to Toto Wolff, on that occasion they would have won in any court, but they decided not to proceed to avoid changing the outcome of the sporting result. We will see how Massa's trial, which directly accuses Ferrari, will proceed. However, I'm curious to know your opinion on all the topics we covered in the video. As always, I remind you to leave a like, subscribe, and activate notifications so you don't miss any videos on the channel. That's all from Rastro. See you in the next video.